jumped in when I was trying to get a talk going at Marin JCC, and it's my hometown. I've been here for 30 years. Bar and bat mitzvah over next door at Rodef, and have had many events at the JCC through the kids' high school and sports. So thank you so much for allowing me to come on tonight. So I just published a book and actually soon to be movie called Newark Minutemen. And Newark Minutemen is based on my own family story, of which my mom, who's 95 and still going strong right now, helped me sort of research and put together. And so Newark Minutemen is a love story. It's a star-crossed love story that's doomed for failure. It's set in Newark, New Jersey, and it's set across what is a little-known historical backdrop of what was the rising German-American Nazi Party in America during the Great Depression. So this is in between the wars, well before World War II. We have this German-American Party forming in our country. And the story follows a Jewish boxer. His name is Yael, and he goes undercover for the resistance in New Jersey that was being organized by the Jewish mafia and our government up against the German-American Nazi Party. Along the way, he falls in love with Krista, who happens to be the daughter of the head of the German-American Bund. And so that's the enemy, and you can imagine the conflict that comes across in a story. And the way I wrote the story in the book was you have four narrators telling the story, both the good guys and the bad guys. And so I kind of wanted you to fall in love or at least have empathy for both sides, and that sort of makes it all the more complicated. And so through these four characters' eyes, you as the reader then examine why America back then closed our eyes to this satellite that Hitler was building in America for his Nazi empire. And in fact, this whole story has been buried, and we would be living quite a different American history right now if it had come true. So that's sort of the story itself.
Great. Okay. And so you talk about writing this from the perspective of several people, including the antagonist, in order to build empathy. Do you talk a little bit more about that decision to do that, and also what empathy you felt?
Sure. So first of all, the four characters are Yael and Krista. So that's the hero and heroine. And also Führer Fritz Kuhn, who was the self-proclaimed American Hitler. So in America, we actually had this American Hitler running our country. And then the fourth character is Longies Wilman. And Longies Wilman was the head of the mob at the time in Newark, New Jersey. And so as I was writing this, a lot of people are like, simplify this, do not make it four-person perspective, especially it's your first novel. And I just felt that I wanted people to know, especially this character of Fritz Kuhn, why he was so charismatic and why our country was really tilting toward this way of Nazism, and why they were attracted to him. And, you know, we all know the punchline in the end, and we all know in the end who to like and who not to like. But I wanted you to be confused at times. I wanted the reader to be confused at times, or at least question, my gosh, why was half our country following this guy? And by the way, the other guy, Longies Wilman, he's a bad guy too. He's a mafia. He's head of the mafia, and he is doesn't do some nice things as well. And Why do we fall in love with him? Why does he become heroic to us? And so I was just so determined to have you question, try to, so actually really good question. So when I was doing this with my mom, I spent like 2 years every single day talking to her and asking her every single detail because I really wanted to put myself in her shoes during the Great Depression. I wanted to know how they took out their trash, how they took showers, every single detail, because I wanted to truly understand, because maybe back then, maybe you were torn toward the right or to the left. And so that's why I was driven to really help the reader understand why there was this divide in our country.
Great, great. I'll also remind people, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to use the chat and type your questions, and I'll collect them for the end, or maybe we'll just sort of do a little more freewheeling. But so you mentioned your mom, which is a great segue into the next, which is how did you get to this story? How did you find this story? How did you hear about it? Talk about that whole process.
Sure. So as I mentioned, my mom's 95 now, and all our lives, I have 2 sisters, and all our lives. So remember, so my mom grew up in Newark, New Jersey. She was an immigrant, child of immigrants from Russia who escaped from Russia. 4 brothers, big family. They all cousins. Everybody lived in this melting pot of Newark. And so my mom told us stories all our lives as we were growing up, bad and good. And she told us the stories about the Great Depression and about, her family that was killed in the Holocaust, and how one of the cousins escaped. And my aunt was part of the underground. And she also talked about her older brother, Harry, who was a prize-fighting boxer. We all knew that story. It was in the newspaper. We knew the trophy. And so we'd heard these stories all our lives, but we were kids and we really didn't listen. And then at her 90th birthday, our goal was to get 90 people there. And we got all the old cousins there, and they're all talking. And one of the stories they start talking about was, remember your brother, Harry, the boxer who used to go out and beat up the Nazis. And I was like, well, what do you mean beat up the Nazis? You mean like over in Germany, beat up the Nazis? They're like, no, right in Newark, New Jersey. He'd go out. He was part of this group called Newark Minutemen that was put together by the mafia head in Long East Wilman. And he would go out, and the mom would yell at him when he came home, what are you doing beating up the Nazis again? So I started asking questions, and my cousin and I became possessed with this story. And we started saying what was going on at the time. And we started uncovering that during the time this is the middle of the 30s, this is 1936, 37, 38, there was a German-American party. As I mentioned, at the top was this American Führer, and he was called Führer Fritz Kuhn. And he literally divided our country up into 3, and Germany called us the colony. And underneath him, there were there's a whole hierarchy and thousands of cells. And these groups would meet. They would actually go to our NRA, because our NRA was giving away guns for free, get guns from our NRA, be trained by our National Guard, wear Hitler uniforms that were smuggled in as they trained. They had what was an equivalent to an SS called the OD, which were trained to guard the Führer and be the special police. And this Führer actually, he turned this party, or this group, into a corporation that had 6 companies underneath it, and they raised millions and millions of dollars. They had newspapers, they had these troops, if you will, and they also had 25 Nazi Hitler youth camps across the United States. They had a couple out here, but the big ones were in New Jersey and New York. Big meaning they were very organized and they had big memberships and raised tons of money. And in fact, this one in Long Island, New York, in Yaphank, Long Island, it was called Camp Siegfried. It came out later in the FBI documents that they were, in fact, raping young girls with the goal of increasing the Aryan population in America. So, so this was all going on behind the scenes. As I said, my cousin and I became obsessed with this story. I can talk about the different kinds of research I uncovered, but we uncovered amazing things. And so what happened was you have this whole thing going on, but because of First Amendment rights, our government really couldn't do anything. These guys were marching down our avenues, dressed in Hitler uniforms, having these camps, newspapers, all kinds of activities. And because of First Amendment rights, we couldn't do anything. So our government went to, actually Meyer Lansky was the head of the Jewish mob at the time. They went to Meyer Lansky and he said, look, we need your help. And remember, this is the 30s. Who's got power in the 30s? Everybody lost their money in the Great Crash. The mafia is the one that has the money and the power. They have the power in our country at the time. So the government went to the mafia and they said, we need your help. There's a American Nazi party infiltrating our country and rising as a party, and they're going to put a president in power. They're going to take over. Will you help us? We'll pay you. And Meyer Lansky said, you don't need to pay me. You just look that way and we'll take care of it. And what Meyer Lansky did is he went over to his buddy in Newark, New Jersey, named Longy Zwillman, because Longy had a bunch of boxers. And the boxers were a very organized group. And he basically went to the boxers, organized them, trained them, paid them to be a group called the Newark Minutemen, which on a minute's notice, one guy could be called up, 10 guys, 100 guys, 1,000 guys to go out and be a resistance for some of the protests that were going on, go undercover, do whatever needed to be done to thwart this party that was rising in our country. And so the boxers in New Jersey were trained and became our resistance. And my Uncle Harry was one of them. And I've met sons and daughters of many others, but they were heroes.
Yeah, it's just such a great story. So a couple questions from the audience here. And Arthur Lieberman wants to know, why did this happen in Newark? Like, why Newark?
Well, great question. So Newark was considered, so one step back was 1933 was sort of the triple bewitching hour of when all this started happening. You have Hitler coming into power, the end of the Prohibition, Roosevelt as president, and the Great Depression. Well, I guess that's four things happening. And so our country was in this odd situation, and New Jersey was a melting pot of all of these different ethnic groups that were in our country. I guess there was an overflow of New York, but I actually read there was, so where Bamberger's was, so Newark was, they had Bamberger's on one corner, which was a big department store, and all these department stores. And this corner in Newark was the most crowded spot in America. More people went past that spot. There were subways and people than anywhere else in America. And because you had all these ethnic groups and massive populations, you had this, I guess, friction going on in Newark. New Jersey itself, for some reason, also was a big German American area, and there were different cities that actually there would be. We had certain ammunition plants, for instance, down in it was the town called, it was like in central New Jersey. It was Camp Nordland was the camp there, but that whole town was, there was a camp built there because the whole town was German, and they all worked at this ammunition plant, which we later found out that was a really bad idea because all of our secrets were going over to Germany. But I guess it was the overflow of New York, but Newark was this incredible ethnic melting pot. And so that's where Fritz Kuhn actually had an office in New York, but he also had an office in Newark on, my mom didn't even know this, but on the street that she used to live, Nye Avenue. She lived on Hawthorne Avenue and Nye Avenue, if any of you are from Newark, New Jersey.
Right, and Deborah Soled here mentions that the Bund met in Teaneck in the basement of an ice cream shop, but this was long before it became heavily Jewish.
Yeah.
So another question from someone who is named Jason Harris, but is probably not actually named Jason Harris. Why were so many, and this is a question that I wrote down too, is like, why were so many people I know the Germany story, why so many it's like, that's what they, you teach that in school. Why were so many Germans attracted to Hitler and the Nazis in the 30s? That story I know. I don't know why it seemed to be so effective here. And as this person points out, like, Roosevelt was elected. So why was this so powerful or so attractive?
You mean the whole Nazi party?
Yeah, the American Nazi Party, and yeah.
Yeah, I think, to me, what I have taken away is that during the Great Depression, when you couldn't even put food on your table, and people didn't have jobs, people were losing faith in the government. And when you lose faith in the government, you look other ways. And I think some people looked toward, I always get this wrong, the left, which was more of the Roosevelt, the country's going to help you, the country's communism, socialism type ideas. And some people looked to the right, which was like they were looking across the ocean. And hey, in Germany, everybody was going to school, everybody had a job, everybody was eating. Now, we didn't know some of the trade-offs for that, and we were just learning about some of the other things that were happening. But I think a lot of people were losing faith in what was democracy. Democracy was on trial during the 1930s. People were like, does this work or not? So I think there was a lot of questions about that, and people trying to explore what was the answer.
Yeah, fascinating. Someone else wants to know, was The Man in the Glass Castle based on the same time? There's the TV show, which I haven't seen, but there's a TV show called The Man in the Glass Castle. Was this based on the same time?
So Man in the High Castle, that was actually based, I think that happened in 1960s. And the concept of that is dystopian, where Germany and Japan win the war, divide the United States in half. And in fact, it starts pretty much, Hitler is old and he's dying. So I think it's like 1962, because I think Kennedy might be president. But the show that is very much like it is, if anybody's seen Plot Against America, which is what's his name? Philip Roth, right? Exactly. Jason Harris. All I see is Jason Harris. I don't. Philip Roth wrote that, and that takes place in 1940, which was, a couple of years after this. So my mom, it's interesting. She was 15 at that time. She went to that high school, and Philip Roth is also a dystopian where Roosevelt is beaten by, can't think clearly tonight, Charles Lindbergh becomes president. And so the way I explain this is my story is sort of the prequel to Plot Against America. And if my story had come true, that's where we probably would have been, because it was Charles Lindbergh that they were trying to put truly into office. You know, Jason, I would love also, because somebody brought it up, I saw in one of the notes, that there was a big event at Madison Square Garden. And I have a clip. I would love to show that to give some people some visual. So what I'm going to show is, this is true footage, and there's tons of this footage out there. This just happened to be a short cut of some of the footage, but on President's Day in 1939, so this is 6 months before Hitler invades Poland, Fritz Kuhn has a Nuremberg-like rally in Madison Square Garden. And Madison Square Garden back then was like the icon of our time. So it was symbolic. And he has this rally, and his goal of this rally, it was called Der Tag, and it was the day to claim the German American Nazi Party and take over America. And what you'll see is that event, and know that outside there's about 200,000 people protesting. And this scene is actually where my book starts and ends. So I'm gonna share screen, and okay, start it up.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protect ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite hand of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Stop share. Okay. So I don't know, has anybody ever seen that clip? Yeah, I was chilled when I saw it. And that's when I said, I want this story to be told. It's a hole in our American history.
Yeah, I've never seen that before. I mean, it's just so I'd never encountered any of this stuff before. One of the things that I told you, it just happened that the week that you and I first got connected over email, I had just finished reading a book about similar efforts to combat the American Nazis, but that were taking place in Los Angeles with Hollywood. and the Jews of Hollywood and some of the folks down there. And it was just like, I never heard any of these stories before. It's just so interesting. So you've talked about this a little bit, but why did you find this story so compelling? And then I'm just interested, like, how long did it take you to write? What was the process? How does Hollywood fit into all this? Because I know this is being made into a movie now.
Sure. So I don't know why I was so initially possessed. I think I started learning about this, and then I saw this clip and put it together with what my uncle had been involved with and other people in my family. And so I started crafting this whole story. And in fact, I first wrote the screenplay. I remember the way I write a screenplay is I go and take all these pictures and put together a picture book. And I showed my, at the time, 17-year-old high school son this story. And I said, what do you think of the story? And he actually read it. And, high school kids don't really read usually, but he read it. And he said, I love it. And I said, why do you love it? And he said, because we never learned this in school. And I was like, okay, I have a story here. And as I said, I because I know the business a little bit better, I put together the screenplay and I went out and I pitched it. And because of a combination of the story and some of the sort of, this is just in the past 4 years, some of the things that are going on in our country, people hooked onto it and said, this is a really interesting, compelling story. And because I had never done this before, I worked with a friend of mine, Sue Turley, and we sort of went through some back doors and naively knocked on some doors and got to the very top, and people were very interested, and ended up coming across connecting with actually through another local person, Kevin Joseph, was working for a company called Fulwell 73. And these were 4 Jewish guys in the UK. And their 5th partner is James Corden, who does the Late Late Show here in LA. And I went to them, or I'm sorry, Kevin sort of presented this to them, and he said, you guys probably aren't the right ones for this, but I just want you to let you know that I'm working on this. And they're like, well, wait a minute, let us talk about this. And so Leo Pearlman, the producer of the group, he and I talked, and we instantly connected because we started talking about our grandmothers and how his grandmother escaped, and she went to the UK and mine here, but a lot of similarities, and we kind of connect on a very familial level. And I just said, you know what, he gets it. He gets the sensibility of this. He knows what I'm trying to do. He understands this legacy and this feeling and some of the grit that I wanted behind it. And so ended up working with Leo and signing a deal a couple of years ago. And that process is moving forward. This pesky little COVID thing got in the way a little bit, but we have attached 2 really great screenwriters, and we're talking to some other folks right now. So that's moving forward. But then along the way, my mom, she kept asking me every single day, when's the movie coming out? When's the movie coming out? And so I'm like, okay, this is going to take a while. So I had kept the book rights. So I said, all right, this was, just over a year ago. I said, I'm going to write the book. And so I had the story because I had I had my timeline and I had the characters. And so I think, okay, this is going to be easy. So I crank out this book, and everybody who read it kept saying, well, this sounds like a screenplay. And I'm like, what do you mean? So I ended up getting an editor who sort of took me under her wing and said, look, you can't just, show things. You have to make people imagine things like a book. I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. So I ended up writing this book, again, as I said, I was just so committed to making it four-person perspective. And I was able to do a deal with a group called Morgan James Publishing at the end of last year, and they promised to get it out by this year. And let's see, we got to, it wasn't supposed to be out till actually December 1st. And we got to March, and they asked me, because of the shelter in, if I wanted to release the ebook early. And I said, sure, why not? What, you know, how hard can that be? Well, try releasing not only a book for the first time, but a book during a lockdown, when I was supposed to be on a whole Jewish tour in person and everything. It's been quite an experience. But what I did was, it was so overwhelming because I could do a zillion things. And I said, all right, I'm going to start in Newark. I'm going to see if I can get some talks in Newark. And back then, nobody even knew how to turn on Zoom. But we got a couple going. And then I created this whole great group around Newark, New Jersey. And, you know, a lot of them knew about this. Some of them, their family was involved. I have all these now people who've come out that my granddad was a Minuteman, and I've tried to start this gallery on my website actually with all the Minutemen. And then through there, I built the audience and have done some big, huge talks in Florida, and I've started doing some others around the country through, it's called the Jewish Book Council actually is where I'm starting. But I've also done some at the Newark Library. That was amazing to talk to them, because some of them knew about some of this, and to put some more pieces together and more people together. And yeah, I just keep getting more and more stories. And even Meyer Lansky's grandson called me. So it's been an incredible path. And you know, as I said, my mom's 95, so we're hoping this movie comes out, I don't know, as soon as it's reasonable anyway.
Very cool. So you said it just a moment ago, and then you mentioned earlier about how your high school son read this and found it really interesting. Why haven't these stories been told? As I said, I never heard any of this stuff, and I'm probably somebody that would pass as an expert on the Nazi rise to power and the Holocaust, and my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, but I never heard of this stuff about American Jews fighting the Nazis here. Like, why? How come we didn't know? Why did this?
It's a great question, and the answers I've come up with are, number one, you know, maybe it was all upstaged by the war. But still, it's American history, so I don't 100% buy that. Two, you know, some of it was secret. I mean, it was the mafia working with our government to try to put down this party, but that's sort of still not the whole story. I do know that a lot of the research I did was through FBI documents, like really, really thick stuff that were only released, I forget how many years they have to wait, but it was only released, I think, in 2013, some of these testimonies. So, but the answer isn't, none of that satisfies me. And that's why I was like, we got to fill in the hole here. I don't know. I don't know why exactly. Well, like if I ask my mom, she'll say like, you know, the guys used to just go out and have these fights and these riots. And I mean, well, one thing that happened was Fritz Kuhn, after that 1939 thing in Madison Square Garden, 6 months later, he was actually arrested for tax evasion and tax fraud. So then the German-American button kind of went away. It dribbled a little bit after that, but after that, it went away. So that could be part of the reason, because he was never successful. But still, I don't know exactly why the whole story wasn't told.
Yeah. And interesting. And Sarah Fishkin points out she also grew up in Newark. In your opinion, how effective were the Minutemen in combating the Bund? And was the entry, maybe you just answered this, but was the entry of the U.S. into World War II the cause of the decline of the Bund?
Well, I think, so to answer the first question, the Newark Minutemen were very successful. It was, so they would not only go out and, first of all, it was a huge organization, because everybody who went out and fought as a Newark Minuteman got paid $100. So that was big money, and that got around fast. And they became very organized, and they would hear about and disrupt any of these meetings that were going on, any of these marches that were going on. It took a while, but they would do that, and they were the ones too that would go under. Some of them went undercover to get some of this information that brought Fritz Kuhn down. Again, the mafia back then had a lot of power, a lot of control, and a big network. And these guys were kind of their soldiers. Wait, and what was the second part of that question?
Whether the entry of the United States into World War II, was that the reason why the Bund fell apart?
Well, certainly part of it, and certainly, the leaders that were planning to take over at America sort of opened their eyes. But it was interesting because what was said was that event at Madison Square Garden, because there were 200,000 people outside rallying against that event, that raised the awareness. Finally, people said, what the heck, what is going on here? And Madison Square Garden, it almost backfired. I mean, that was a statement. And they were saying, we're going to be a party here in America, and you have all these people protesting against it. Another thing that happened that I haven't talked about, but it was around this time as well that Hollywood came out with a movie called Confessions of a Nazi Spy, I believe was the name of it. And it was this Hollywood movie that also raised the awareness of Americans as to what was going on, because we had had a couple of spies that were caught. And the guy that worked on the case went to Hollywood, and he wasn't supposed to, but he told the story. And it's a really hard story to find online. And I'll send you all the link if you'd like. But it's really an interesting story to watch, and it does talk about this whole thing. So again, after that movie, again, I don't understand why this disappeared into history.
I really like the idea that there was a secret slush fund paying Jews to go beat up Nazis. And I'm wondering if that's still active somewhere today, and can I do that on the weekends as like a supplemental income kind of a thing. Cynthia Ullman wants to know what happened to the Bund's supporters during the war. Japanese Americans on the West Coast were interned. And even if Fritz Kuhn was kind of taken out of the action, all those American Nazis were still running around. So what happened to them?
Well, a lot of them did wake up. A lot of them, they were German Americans. By the way, they were Americans. And a lot of them woke up and said, wow, this is, well, some of them woke up, some of them went home. There was, it's interesting, there was a social studies teacher in the 70s. One of the research I did was a book that he had written that, it's a really hard name to say. I don't have it here with me, but it's what I can't even say the salute, but he did this incredible research. He quit his job and he went around in the 1970s and interviewed the kids that used to be in the camps, the kids that used to be in the Nazi camps. and asked them about the camps and traced their lives of where their lives went after that. And a lot of them, you know, again, they woke up. Some of them, there was a deal with, at the highest levels of our banks. He actually, this guy actually traced the money trail back to Germany and proved that Germany was involved with the American Nazi Bund. And there was a deal that if you brought American dollars to certain banks, they would give you this special mark. It was called an RM kind of mark. And that mark was worth a lot of money. But the deal is that you could only get it if you went home to Germany before 1939 and went to your hometown, and that money would be waiting for you. So there were some people that did that, but in general, a lot of these people woke up. Even Charles Lindbergh apologized. He said he was wrong, and it was not as perhaps Hitler was laying out how nice of a life it would be to be a Nazi.
Yeah. And Jim Affel wants to know who was funding these $100 payments, and I would add sort of more broadly, who was funding we know Germany was funding the Nazi side of things. Who was funding the? So
apparently, Longies Willman, I don't know why he's not as popular as some of these other mafia guys, but first of all, I will say Longies Willman lived in my mom's neighborhood, and everybody loved him. He was called the Robin Hood of the neighborhood. He'd set up kitchens. He'd give everybody jobs. He helped bring people escape from Germany. He was young, good looking. They called him the Gatsby of gangsters. But during the bootlegging years, remember, he pretty much controlled Newark and the water there. He was the wealthiest of all the at least the Jewish, I'm not sure about the Italians, but at least the Jewish mob. And he had lots of cash. And where the rest of the country didn't. They lost it during the war, and he was very loaded. He was loaded. So he funded it.
Oh yeah, it's just so interesting. It's so interesting. The government, the American government, was all involved and knew everything. It's fascinating.
Well, and back then, so there's all kinds of stories. Longy put the mayor and the governor of New Jersey in office, and I'm sure that happened in other states as well, Chicago, New York, wherever. And back then, the FBI wasn't so. They weren't like we know now. They were just kind of forming. And Hoover, after the Lindbergh baby, was when he first started. That was just a couple of years. That was all in this time period. That's when he first started the fingerprinting. But the FBI didn't have the power. They had a weird relationship with the mob, but they worked with them.
Yeah. Wow.
In fact, I'll throw this in real quick.
Yeah.
So one of the research that I did was I discovered this story about these two brothers, John and Jim Metcalf, and it was in 1936. John worked for the Chicago Daily News, and Jim worked for the FBI. And they weren't Jewish; they were German. But the editor of their paper, he was a very creative guy, and he said, "Look, what do you guys think of going undercover for the German-American Bund, and then we'll do this big story?" And so the two brothers went undercover. They got in the very inner circles, and John Metcalf even became sort of a PR guy for Fritz Kuhn. And they spent 6 months undercover and then did this 14-page daily news report. And I actually found John's diaries in the Hoover Institute, and there are 12 boxes of them there. And I end up calling his son, who's 80 years old now and lives in down in LA. And I said, do you know about these diaries? And I said, yeah. He goes, yeah, I'd heard about them and all that. He goes, use them, use them, use them. And so some of the, like, I have this one scene that's this initiation scene where Yael is initiated into what it was like their SS. And it was a very detailed account about the initiation and how they line up. And so I sort of take that whole scene from the diaries of John Metcalf. And why did I tell that whole story? Maybe about the FBI, that the levels of government and everybody that was involved underground in trying to, like I said at sort of the beginning, there was First Amendment rights. So it wasn't so easy to say, no, you can't march and raise your hand like that and carry guns and train and all that.
Yeah. So Joyce Syed asks, and I think we're all wondering this, and maybe you can give us like the 2-minute, without too many spoilers, the romantic story. What's the love story of your uncle falling in love?
Sure. And I almost got in trouble for this one time because one of my first talks was with a rabbi, and he said, how can you do this? But what the story is, the Jewish boxer falls in love, or meets, I should say, this daughter and her sister of the leader of the German American Bund. And at first, it's kind of a joke, you know, and then gradually he starts falling for her, and she kind of falls for him. It's a triangle, by the way. So she's engaged to this guy who is going to be shipped over and work for the Nazi regime. So it's a triangle, and there's a big rumble between her boyfriend's gang and his gang. So there's a little bit of that. And but gradually they start to understand each other, and she's really, the story really evolves around her. She's the one that changes. When he's a boy, he sees something horrible happen to his father, and his life is set. It's about revenge. She's the one that changes and questions and all of that. And what happens, though, is that it's obviously not a kosher relationship. So she goes off to one of the Nazi youth camps for the summer with her boyfriend and all her friends. And Yael has kind of fallen for her and said, look, I know, you know, this is wrong. I'm going to come and rescue you. And first she's kind of like, okay. And then she's like, maybe I don't want to be rescued. This is my life. And that's why the first person perspective, I really try to tear the reader, and, you know, she's torn. And, you know, this might not be the right life for her. And I can't give away everything, but that's kind of, so you've got this conflict of them, and then the conflict, of course, of the Bund and the America and the mafia. So you've got those kind of two parallels going on, but that's sort of the love story. Is that enough?
I look forward to seeing George Clooney and Scarlett Johansson playing in this movie. I'll be start that rumor.
Leo DiCaprio or Tom Hanks.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, so we're getting close to time, but I've I have a lot of questions, but I'll kind of have this one. One of the things that I got from this book, and you said this right in the beginning as well. I mean, you talk about how these Jews in this place, they were your family. They were, you said, survivors and fighters. And as you write about it, as we all know, we're seeing today in our world this resurgence of right-wing violence, sometimes directed at the Jews. It's also coming from the left wing increasingly, and it's really something in the last several years that is really impossible to miss. And you write that part of the intention of this book is about fighting against complacency. So one of the questions I have. I forget the name, but there was a German journalist a recent one whose name I completely forget, who talks about how Jews historically have an instinct for danger. And this makes them rise to the challenge of threats that are in their midst. And I see what's going on, and I wonder if that's still, do we still have that instinct for danger, American Jews? And are we still fighting it in the way that we should be, or the way that, you know, these guys were back in the 1930s? And how do you assess what's going on today in light of that?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know how many of this group lives in Marin, but I don't know if you heard the recent news about our local high school, and there were some kids who been, so this is just a local reaction to your question, but I was invited to be part of this group, and I've just been amazed at the dedication behind education. Like, well, okay, how do we solve this? You know, was this just you know, somebody was bored because of the pandemic and did this, or is this much deeper, or are they being influenced, or what? And that there is this Jewish group that's saying, okay, we got to educate, we got to wake up here, we got to look at some policies. And so at a local level, I saw we reacted to that. On a broader level, I know there are some groups, maybe some too extreme, but I hope we still have it, and it's you know, and I hope we have it as Jews, but I also hope we have it as Americans, because I think other things could be happening here that we're just not paying attention to, and I hope we're always watching and questioning and fighting, if you will. I mean, I know that's sort of become my reason to be, but I don't know. What do you think? Anybody?
Wow. Yeah, anybody. Well, we're right at 8 o'clock, but if anybody has a couple of quick hot takes, I think that would be really interesting. You can type it in the chat, or if you would prefer to speak, let me know. Looks like we have a hand raised right here. Did you want to? Unfortunately, your name is labeled Jason Harris, but your hand is raised, and if you'd like to unmute and ask or say something. Nope. Okay. Well, I guess we'll sort of leave that thought hanging out there to think about, and to bring this story kind of up into the present space, and to, you know, that it's about this historical event that took place a long time ago, but has some relevance to today, and thinking about our own position and place and what's going on. I hate that. I feel like I hate that there's still questions out there, and I hate that we have to wrap this up, because this was just so interesting.
Jason, please, you're welcome to share my email or anything if people would like to continue. Or I have a website, NewarkMinutemen.com, that lets you contact me as well. So would love
get that around.
To keep everybody updated and get questions if they come up.
Yeah, we'll get that around, and I'll send around as well a link to purchase the book if you're interested. It's at Book Passage, it's at Amazon, it's kind of everywhere. Yeah, well, thank you for coming on and for making this happen. I mean, this was so interesting. I've just discovered this like whole new area of history that I never knew about, and it's just been fascinating. And then before I release you all, I just want to remind everyone that this book talk and the other programming that we do at the JCC, especially at the Taube Center for Jewish Peoplehood, it's all made possible by generous donations from people like you and from people in this community, and we all really, really do appreciate it, and especially these days, no donation is too small. So if you have enjoyed this program and others that we do, please consider making a donation. marinjcc.org/donate. marinjcc.org/donate. That's where you can go. And yeah, thank you, Leslie Berry, once again. And this has been really fantastic, and I've really enjoyed this.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you all so
thank
much.
You all. Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
Good night. Thank you.
Let's see here.